Emily and I had always dreamed of exploring the open roads of America. Our schedules had finally aligned, and we decided to embark on a spontaneous road trip through Tennessee, aiming to explore the lesser-known sights of the state. It was a sunny Friday morning when we set off in our trusty sedan, loaded with snacks, maps, and a camera for capturing memories. Our plan was to drive through picturesque small towns and scenic routes, avoiding the major highways as much as possible. We wanted to experience the heart of Tennessee, away from the tourist traps and crowded attractions. We started our journey by heading south from Nashville, enjoying the rolling hills and charming rural landscapes. As the day wore on, we meandered through small towns with names like Lynchburg and Mount Juliet. We took breaks at local diners, chatting with friendly locals and collecting quirky souvenirs. By late afternoon, we found ourselves on a secluded back road that promised a more authentic view of Tennessee's countryside. "This road is beautiful," Emily remarked, her gaze fixed on the golden hues of the setting sun painting the sky. "It feels like we're really off the beaten path." I nodded, adjusting the GPS to make sure we were still on track. "It's perfect. We should look for a nice spot to watch the sunset before we head to the next town." We continued driving, the road winding and narrowing as we ventured further from the main routes. The forest on either side grew denser, and the light dimmed under the canopy of trees. Just as we were about to give up on finding a suitable spot, we came across a small, hand-painted sign partially hidden by overgrown foliage. The sign read, "Scenic Overpass, 2 miles. "That sounds interesting," I said, pointing to the sign. "Let's check it out. We've come this far, it might be worth it." Emily agreed, and we turned onto a dirt path that led deeper into the woods. The road became bumpier and more uneven, but the promise of a scenic view kept us going. As we approached, we noticed the area around the overpass was eerily quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Finally, we arrived at the overpass. It was an old, weather-beaten structure that spanned a small ravine. The bridge was covered in ivy, and its concrete supports were cracked and worn. Despite its age, there was something strangely captivating about it. "This place is kind of odd," Emily said, peering over the edge of the overpass. "It's like we've stepped into another world." I agreed. The overpass seemed almost forgotten, as if it had been abandoned for decades. Yet, there was an undeniable allure to it, a mystery that beckoned us to explore further. We decided to get out of the car and stretch our legs. The air was crisp, and the forest around us seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Emily snapped a few photos, capturing the stark contrast between the vibrant greenery and the aging overpass. As we walked along the bridge, we noticed something peculiar, faint markings etched into the concrete. They were faded and worn, but they appeared to be symbols or letters, arranged in a pattern that didn't immediately make sense. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Emily asked, tracing her fingers over the symbols. I shook my head. "No, it's definitely unusual. Maybe it's some sort of local graffiti or an old construction marker." We continued our exploration, but a strange sense of unease began to creep over me. It was as if the overpass was more than just an old structure, it felt like it was hiding something. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the bridge, and the temperature seemed to drop rapidly. "Maybe we should head back," Emily suggested, breaking the silence. "It's getting late, and we don't want to be out here after dark." I nodded in agreement, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We made our way back to the car, glancing over our shoulders as if expecting to see something, or someone, watching us from the woods. As we drove away from the overpass, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the night began to close in. We talked about our plans for the next day, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over us. But as we continued down the road, I couldn't help but wonder what secrets the hidden overpass might hold. The drive back to the main road was quiet, with only the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees to break the silence. Emily and I exchanged occasional glances, both of us lost in thought. The overpass had left an impression on us, one that we couldn't quite shake. By the time we reached a small town called Fairview, it was dark, and we decided to find a place to eat. We stumbled upon a cozy diner with neon lights and a welcoming sign. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting, a sharp contrast to the eerie feeling of the overpass. We settled into a booth and ordered our meals, trying to focus on the pleasant ambience. As we waited for our food, a waitress came over with a stack of local brochures and maps. "You folks new around here?" she asked, her southern drawl evident. "Yes, just passing through," I replied. "We've been exploring some of the back roads and found a hidden overpass. It was pretty interesting." The waitress's eyes widened slightly, and she leaned in closer. "You found that old overpass, huh? Not many people know about that one. It's got a bit of a reputation around here." Emily and I exchanged curious glances. "Reputation?" Emily asked. The waitress nodded. "Some folks say it's haunted, others claim it's a spot for strange rituals. I don't put much stock in that, but it does have an air of mystery about it. If you're interested in exploring more of the area, there's a local historian who loves to talk about the oddities of this region. You might find some intriguing stories." I thanked the waitress and took one of the brochures she had offered. As we ate, we scanned the pamphlets and found an address for the local historian. It seemed like an odd but intriguing opportunity. Emily seemed excited about the idea. "Maybe we should check it out tomorrow. It could be interesting to learn more about the area's history and the overpass." The next morning, after a hearty breakfast at the diner, we set out to find the local historian. The address led us to a charming old house on the edge of town, surrounded by lush gardens and tall oak trees. A hand-painted sign near the driveway read, "Mr. Henry's Historical Tours." We rang the doorbell and were greeted by a kindly old man with a twinkle in his eye. "Welcome. I'm Mr. Henry. You must be the folks interested in the local history." We introduced ourselves and explained our interest in the overpass. Mr. Henry's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Ah, the overpass. A fascinating piece of history. It's one of those places with a lot of stories and legends. Please, come in. I'd be delighted to share what I know." We followed him into a cozy study filled with antique maps, books, and artifacts. Mr. Henry settled into a large armchair and motioned for us to take a seat. "Now, the overpass you visited," he began, "was built in the early 1900s. It was part of an ambitious project to connect isolated communities. However, the project faced numerous setbacks, and the overpass was abandoned long before its intended use." He paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "Over the years, there have been reports of strange occurrences around that area. People have seen unusual lights, heard unexplained noises, and some even claim to have seen shadowy figures." Emily leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "Do you think any of these stories are true?" Mr. Henry smiled knowingly. "It's hard to say. History often gets tangled with folklore. But one thing is clear, the overpass holds a certain allure, a kind of magnetic pull that attracts those looking for something beyond the ordinary." He then handed us a folder filled with old newspaper clippings and photographs. "These might give you more insight into the overpass's history and the legends surrounding it. I recommend taking a closer look at the patterns and symbols found on the structure. They might offer clues about its past." We thanked Mr. Henry and left with the folder, eager to delve into the material. As we walked back to our car, Emily couldn't contain her excitement. "This is going to be great. We'll have to go back to the overpass and check out those symbols more closely." I nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "Definitely. I'm curious to see if there's more to this than meets the eye." Back at the overpass, we examined the folder's contents. The photographs and clippings revealed a web of intriguing stories and local legends. Some spoke of old rituals, while others mentioned disappearances and strange phenomena. The symbols on the overpass, as described in the clippings, seemed to match the ones we had seen the previous day. "This is getting more interesting by the minute," Emily said, her voice filled with excitement. "I think we need to spend more time here, really look into what's going on." As we prepared to head back to the overpass for a more thorough investigation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to uncover something significant, something that had been hidden for a long time. The invitation to explore had set us on a path of discovery, and I was eager to see where it would lead. Back at the overpass, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. The faint glow of twilight added an eerie atmosphere to the area, making the overpass seem even more mysterious. Emily and I approached the site with renewed determination, armed with the folder of historical clippings and our own observations from the previous day. We parked the car a safe distance away and walked to the base of the overpass. The structure loomed above us, its once imposing features now marred by time and neglect. We turned on our flashlights and began to carefully examine the symbols etched into the concrete. The symbols were intricate and strange, resembling a mix of ancient runes and abstract shapes. "This is definitely not something you see every day," Emily said, tracing a finger along one of the symbols. I nodded, studying the symbols closely. They seem to be organized in a pattern. Maybe there's a message or a code we need to decipher. We took detailed photographs of the symbols from various angles, trying to capture every detail. Emily started taking notes, jotting down any observations or ideas that came to mind. As we worked, the overpass seemed to take on a life of its own, with every creak and rustle of the structure amplifying our sense of unease. After an hour of examining the symbols, we decided to take a break and review the historical clippings Mr. Henry had given us. We spread the clippings out on the hood of our car and began to piece together the information. One article described a series of disappearances that had occurred around the time the overpass was abandoned. The disappearances were linked to the local folklore about the overpass being a site of strange rituals. Another clipping mentioned that the overpass had been a focal point for an old local group known for their secretive and enigmatic practices. "This is starting to make more sense," Emily said, her eyes scanning the articles. "The symbols might be related to these rituals." I agreed. "It's possible. But what were these rituals about? And why did they use the overpass as their site?" As we discussed our findings, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. The overpass, once just an old structure, now felt like it was watching us, holding secrets that were waiting to be uncovered. Just then, a sudden noise interrupted our thoughts. It was a faint scraping sound, coming from somewhere within the overpass. Emily and I exchanged worried glances. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Yeah," Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly. It sounded like it came from inside the overpass. We decided to investigate, our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we approached the entrance to the overpass. The tunnel-like interior was even more unsettling than the outside, with the dim light from our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. We entered cautiously, our footsteps echoing in the confined space. The scraping sound continued intermittently, growing louder as we moved deeper into the overpass. Our breaths quickened, and our senses were on high alert. "Stay close," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Emily nodded, her flashlight trembling slightly as she held it up to illuminate the area. As we turned a corner, we were met with a sight that took our breath away. There, etched into the wall of the overpass, was a large mural depicting a ritualistic scene. Figures in dark robes were arranged around a central symbol, similar to the ones we had seen earlier. In the center of the mural was a depiction of a large, ominous figure, its eyes seemingly following us as we moved. "This is incredible," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's like a piece of history we've uncovered. I agreed, my eyes scanning the mural for any additional details. As I moved closer, I noticed a small, hidden alcove in the wall, partially obscured by debris. I reached into the alcove and pulled out a weathered wooden box. "Look at this," I said, holding up the box. It was old and covered in dust, with strange symbols carved into its surface. Emily's eyes widened in excitement and apprehension. "Do you think it's part of the rituals?" "It's possible," I said. "Let's see what's inside." We carefully opened the box, revealing a collection of old manuscripts, faded photographs, and what appeared to be a ceremonial dagger. The manuscripts were written in a mix of languages, some of which we couldn't recognize. The photographs showed images of people in ceremonial garb performing various rituals. "This is amazing," Emily said, her eyes scanning the contents of the box. "These documents could tell us a lot about what really happened here." As we examined the items, the scratching noise began again, this time more insistent and closer. I turned to Emily, my heart racing. "We need to get out of here. Something doesn't feel right." Emily agreed, and we quickly packed up the items and headed back toward the entrance of the overpass. The sense of urgency grew with each step, and we could hear the scraping noise growing louder behind us. When we finally emerged into the fresh air, we breathed a sigh of relief. We carefully closed the overpass entrance behind us and looked at each other, our faces pale with apprehension. "That was intense," Emily said, her voice shaking. "What do you think was making that noise?" "I don't know," I said. "But I don't think we want to find out." We decided to take the box and its contents to Mr. Henry for further analysis. As we drove back to town, we couldn't stop discussing what we had found. The hidden overpass had revealed a part of history that was both fascinating and unsettling. The discovery had only deepened the mystery surrounding the overpass and the strange occurrences that had been reported over the years. When we arrived at Mr. Henry's house, we presented the box and its contents to him. His eyes widened with interest as he examined the manuscripts and photographs. "This is remarkable," Mr. Henry said, clearly impressed. "These documents could provide valuable insights into the rituals and practices associated with the overpass. I'll need some time to go through them, but I believe you've uncovered something significant." Emily and I left Mr. Henry's house with a sense of accomplishment and curiosity. The hidden overpass had not only revealed its secrets but had also set us on a path of further exploration and discovery. The invitation to explore had led us to uncover a hidden chapter of history, and we were eager to see where this journey would take us next. The discovery of the hidden overpass had left us with more questions than answers. With the box of artifacts in tow, Emily and I returned to our temporary lodging, eager to delve deeper into the strange symbols and signs we had uncovered. The room was dimly lit by the desk lamp, casting an orange glow on the cluttered table where we spread out the manuscripts and photographs. We set aside the ceremonial dagger for now, focusing on the documents and symbols. Emily carefully unrolled one of the manuscripts, revealing pages covered in dense, handwritten text and intricate diagrams. The writing was a mix of old languages and strange symbols that seemed to defy conventional logic. "These symbols," Emily said, pointing to one of the diagrams, "they match the ones we saw at the overpass." I leaned in to examine the symbols more closely. Some were recognizable as ancient runes, while others were completely foreign. It was clear that the symbols were part of a complex system of communication or ritualistic practice. I picked up a photograph from the pile. It showed a group of people in dark robes performing a ritual around a central symbol, similar to those on the manuscripts. The central figure in the photograph was holding a large book open, and the pages were filled with more symbols. "This must be the ritual we saw depicted in the mural," I said, showing the photograph to Emily. The symbols on the book matched the ones on the overpass. Emily nodded, her face illuminated by the desk lamp's light. "If these symbols are part of a ritual, they might hold the key to understanding what happened here." We need to figure out what they mean. We decided to start by cataloging and translating the symbols. Emily used her laptop to search for any references to the symbols and languages, while I took detailed notes on each symbol, comparing them to those in the manuscripts. Hours passed as we painstakingly worked through the documents. We discovered that some symbols were associated with ancient practices related to protection and secrecy, while others were linked to dark rituals and sacrificial rites. The more we uncovered, the more unsettling the symbols became. One symbol, in particular, caught my attention. It was a circle with a series of lines radiating outward, similar to a sunburst. According to the manuscript, this symbol was used to represent a gateway or a passage to another realm. The description was vague, but it suggested that the symbol was significant in the context of crossing between worlds or dimensions. "That's the symbol we saw on the overpass," Emily said, her voice tinged with excitement and apprehension. "It's supposed to be a gateway." The revelation was both fascinating and alarming. If the overpass was indeed meant to serve as a gateway, what was it intended to connect? And why had it been abandoned and hidden? We continued our research, focusing on the purpose of the ritualistic practices. The manuscripts described a series of ceremonies designed to summon and control supernatural entities or forces. The detailed instructions for the rituals were both elaborate and disturbing. "This is starting to make sense," I said, looking up from the manuscript. The overpass might have been a site for these rituals, and the symbols were part of the process. Emily agreed. But why would they need to perform these rituals here? What were they trying to achieve? We turned our attention to the photographs, hoping they might provide additional clues. As we studied the images, a pattern began to emerge. The rituals seemed to involve creating a protective barrier or a boundary, possibly to contain or control something. "There's something else," Emily said, pointing to a faded inscription in one of the manuscripts. "It mentions a guardian that was supposed to watch over the gateway. Do you think that's what we heard scraping inside the overpass?" "It's possible," I said, feeling a shiver run down my spine. The guardian could have been some sort of entity or being associated with the ritual. If the overpass was abandoned, it might have left something behind. The thought of an unknown entity lurking in the overpass was unsettling. We decided to take a break and gather our thoughts. As we sat in silence, the weight of our discovery settled over us. "Do you think we should go back and investigate further?" Emily asked, breaking the silence. "I'm not sure," I replied. "We need to be cautious. If the overpass was used for dark rituals, there might be dangers we're not prepared for." Emily nodded in agreement. "We should consult with Mr. Henry before making any decisions. He might have more insights into the symbols and their significance." With that plan in mind, we packed up the manuscripts and photographs and prepared to visit Mr. Henry the next day. The strange symbols and signs had opened up a new layer of mystery, and we were determined to uncover the full story behind the hidden overpass. As we drifted off to sleep, the symbols danced in our minds, and the eerie feeling of being watched lingered. The hidden overpass had revealed a glimpse into a world of ancient rituals and mysterious practices, and we were on the cusp of uncovering something far beyond our initial expectations. The next morning, we awoke with a sense of unease, our thoughts consumed by the discoveries we had made about the hidden overpass. The eerie silence that greeted us as we prepared for the day seemed almost tangible, pressing in on us with an unsettling weight. After breakfast, Emily and I set out to meet Mr. Henry. The small town streets were quiet, and the usual hustle and bustle were noticeably absent. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Mr. Henry's office was located in an old, brick building on the edge of town. The sign above the door read, "Historical Research and Preservation," and the faded lettering suggested that the building had seen better days. We entered, and the bell above the door jingled softly, breaking the silence. Mr. Henry looked up from his desk as we entered, his face lighting up with a friendly smile. "Good morning. You're here early. Did you find something interesting? We explained our findings from the previous day, the hidden overpass, the strange symbols, and the artifacts we had discovered. Mr. Henry listened intently, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern as we described the details. The overpass and these symbols sound like they're tied to some very old and obscure practices, he said thoughtfully. I've come across references to similar symbols in some of the older texts I've studied. They're often linked to rituals that were meant to protect or guard something important. I handed Mr. Henry the manuscripts and photographs. He examined them carefully, his brow furrowing as he scrutinized the symbols and diagrams. The room was filled with the sound of his pages turning and the soft rustle of the papers. This symbol here, Mr. Henry said, pointing to one of the diagrams, is known to be associated with protective wards. It's often used in rituals to create barriers or to contain entities. Emily and I exchanged glances, the unease in the room growing. The implications of Mr. Henry's insights were troubling. The idea that the overpass was linked to protective rituals suggested that it might have been used to confine or control something potentially dangerous. We were thinking of going back to the overpass to investigate further, Emily said. But given what we've found, we're not sure if it's safe. Mr. Henry's expression grew serious. I understand your concerns. The fact that the overpass was hidden and abandoned could mean that whatever was contained there might still be a threat. It's crucial that you exercise extreme caution if you decide to go back. The conversation left us feeling more apprehensive than before. The sense of foreboding seemed to seep into the very walls of Mr. Henry's office, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. As we left Mr. Henry's office, the eerie silence of the town seemed even more pronounced. The streets were empty, and the quiet was almost oppressive. It was as if the town itself was waiting for something to happen. Emily and I decided to take a walk to clear our heads. We wandered through the deserted streets, the silence amplifying every footstep and distant sound. The absence of people and activity added to the growing sense of unease. We stopped at a small park with a solitary bench overlooking a quiet pond. The water was still, mirroring the overcast sky. We sat down, trying to make sense of the situation. This silence is getting to me, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's like the whole town is holding its breath. I feel the same way, I agreed. It's almost as if something is lurking, waiting for us to make a move. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The silence around us was heavy, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. It felt as though the world had gone quiet in anticipation. Eventually, we decided it was time to return to our lodging and prepare for our next steps. As we walked back, the silence seemed to follow us, growing more intense with each step. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable, and the sense of impending danger was palpable. Back at the lodging, we gathered our things and prepared to head back to the overpass. The silence that had enveloped us during our walk seemed to cling to the room, adding an extra layer of tension. We need to be careful, I said to Emily as we packed. We don't know what we might encounter, and that silence, it's not natural. Emily nodded in agreement. Let's make sure we're prepared for anything. With our supplies packed and our nerves on edge, we set out once more for the hidden overpass. The eerie silence of the town seemed to follow us as we drove, each mile adding to the sense of foreboding. As we approached the overpass, the heavy silence remained, pressing in on us from all sides. The overpass loomed ahead, its hidden presence now even more ominous against the backdrop of the quiet landscape. We parked the RV at a safe distance and prepared to venture into the darkness of the overpass. The silence was deafening, and the weight of our discovery hung heavily on our shoulders. The unknown awaited us, and the eerie silence seemed to promise that whatever lay ahead would be anything but ordinary. The hidden overpass loomed ahead, its shadow stretching across the road like a dark omen. As we approached, the eerie silence from the town seemed to intensify, creating an oppressive atmosphere. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath our feet and the distant hum of the RV's engine as we left it behind. Equipped with flashlights and our camera, Emily and I made our way to the entrance of the overpass. The air grew colder as we neared the shadowed archway, and our breaths came out in visible puffs. The overpass was even more imposing up close. The stone walls were covered in grime and overgrown with vines. We took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, our flashlights cutting through the blackness. As we ventured further inside, the tunnel seemed to stretch on indefinitely, its darkness swallowing our light. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional drip of water from the ceiling and the distant echo of our footsteps. We reached the point where the tunnel began to curve, and the temperature dropped noticeably. My flashlight flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily and I exchanged nervous glances, our unease growing with every step. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a loud crash from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. The sound echoed through the passage, making us jump. We froze, listening intently for any further noises. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding. "Let's check it out." We continued cautiously, our flashlights sweeping the walls for any signs of what might have caused the noise. The tunnel seemed even darker now, with our lights revealing only brief sections of the passage at a time. As we rounded a bend, we saw something strange ahead, a set of footprints, fresh and clear in the dust. They led off into a side passage we hadn't noticed before. The sight of the footprints sent a shiver down my spine. We weren't alone in the tunnel. We followed the footprints into the side passage, which was narrower and even darker than the main tunnel. The air was thick with dust, and each step seemed to stir up more of it, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The passage ended in a small, dimly lit chamber. The flickering light from an old lantern hanging from the ceiling cast unsettling shadows on the walls. The chamber was cluttered with old tools and broken equipment, and the walls were adorned with more of the strange symbols we had seen earlier. In the center of the chamber stood a figure, hunched over something on a makeshift table. The figure was shrouded in darkness, but we could make out the outline of a hooded cloak. The figure's movements were deliberate and precise, and the soft hum of a low, rhythmic chant filled the air. Emily and I exchanged worried glances. We had no idea who or what this figure was, but the situation was growing more disturbing by the second. "Hello?" I called out cautiously. "Is anyone there?" The figure paused, and the chanting stopped abruptly. The hooded figure slowly turned toward us, but the hood obscured its face completely. The silence that followed was heavy and tense. "Who are you?" Emily asked, her voice trembling slightly. The figure remained silent, but the air in the chamber grew colder. We could feel the weight of an unseen presence pressing in on us. The chanting resumed, this time louder and more insistent. It seemed to resonate through the chamber, vibrating in our bones. "We need to leave," I whispered urgently to Emily. "This is not safe." Just as we were about to turn and leave, the figure spoke, its voice low and raspy. "You shouldn't have come here." The words sent a chill down our spines. The figure's voice was eerie and filled with a sense of foreboding. We turned to leave, but the passage behind us was now blocked by an unseen force. The air seemed to pulse with an oppressive energy, and the walls of the chamber appeared to close in on us. Emily and I looked at each other in panic. The figure's chanting grew louder, and the light from the lantern flickered violently. The symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and change, as if alive. "We have to find another way out," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the chanting. We scrambled through the chamber, searching for any way out. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift and change, guiding us to a small, hidden door we had missed earlier. With a burst of adrenaline, we forced the door open and squeezed through, finding ourselves in another dark passage. The chanting grew fainter behind us, and the oppressive energy seemed to dissipate as we moved away. We stumbled through the dark, our flashlights barely cutting through the gloom. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into the open air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. We looked back at the overpass, its dark archway now seeming even more foreboding. Emily and I were shaken but relieved to be out of the tunnel. The encounter with the hooded figure and the chanting had left us deeply unsettled. We knew that we had narrowly escaped something dangerous, and the events of the day would stay with us for a long time. As we drove away from the overpass, the silence of the town seemed to follow us, a haunting reminder of the encounter we had just experienced. The hidden overpass had revealed a dark and disturbing secret, and we were left with more questions than answers. The unsettling encounter had confirmed our fears. The overpass was not just a hidden structure, but a place of ominous rituals and hidden dangers. The silence that followed was a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, waiting for those who dared to uncover its secrets. The oppressive atmosphere of the hidden overpass was almost tangible as we scrambled through the dark passage. Emily and I were both breathing heavily, our hearts racing with fear and adrenaline. The chanting from the chamber behind us still echoed in our ears, an unsettling reminder of the danger we had narrowly escaped. The passage we had found after forcing open the small door was even narrower and more claustrophobic than the main tunnel. The walls seemed to press in on us, and the flickering beam of our flashlights barely illuminated the way forward. Each step we took was accompanied by a growing sense of urgency. Escaping this place felt like a race against time. We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The passage twisted and turned unpredictably, and it was hard to tell if we were making any progress. The temperature dropped further, and our breaths came out in frosty puffs, mingling with the cold, damp air. "Where the hell is this leading?" Emily gasped, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, trying to keep my own fear in check. "But we need to keep moving." We continued down the passage, our flashlights revealing strange markings on the walls, more of those cryptic symbols, their meaning still unknown to us. The walls were damp and slick, and the floor was covered in a layer of grime that made every step feel unstable. At one point, we reached a fork in the passage. The left path looked even darker and more foreboding, while the right path seemed to have a faint glimmer of light at the far end. "Which way?" Emily asked, her voice filled with anxiety. "I think we should try the right path," I suggested. "It looks like there might be an exit or something up ahead." We took the right path, pushing forward with renewed determination. The light at the end of the passage grew brighter, but it was still a distant glow. As we approached, the passage began to widen, and we could see the faint outline of a door at the end. Relief washed over us as we neared the door. It was an old, rusted metal door with a small window that was covered in grime. I reached for the door handle and turned it, but the door was stuck fast. "Damn it!" I muttered, tugging at the door with increasing desperation. "It's locked." Emily looked around the small room we had entered. "Maybe there's another way out. Look for any other exits or hidden passages." I scanned the room, my flashlight illuminating the dusty corners and cobwebs. The room was cluttered with old equipment and discarded items, but there was no obvious sign of another exit. Just then, I heard a faint sound coming from behind us, a low, rumbling noise that grew louder with each passing second. It was as if the walls were closing in on us, and the tunnel itself was shifting. The ground trembled beneath our feet, adding to our growing sense of panic. "We need to find another way," I shouted over the noise. "Now!" We searched frantically for any signs of escape, our flashlights darting across the walls. Emily noticed a loose section of the wall, and together, we pried it open to reveal a small, hidden passage. The passage was barely wide enough for us to crawl through, but it was our only option. "Quickly!" Emily urged as she squeezed through the opening. I followed closely behind, pushing through the narrow space with all the strength I could muster. The hidden passage was cramped and disorienting, but it led us away from the rumbling noise and the sense of impending doom. We crawled on our hands and knees, trying to ignore the cold, damp air and the suffocating darkness. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into another chamber. This one was smaller but seemed to be a part of the overpass's original structure. The walls were covered in faded murals and strange symbols, and there was a faint light coming from a crack in the ceiling. "We're getting closer," Emily said, her voice filled with hope. I nodded, trying to focus on the light. We moved toward it, pushing aside debris and navigating through the clutter. As we approached the crack in the ceiling, it became clear that it was a small, narrow shaft that led to the surface. "We can get out through here," I said, examining the crack. "It's our best chance." Emily and I worked together to clear the debris around the shaft, revealing a space large enough for us to squeeze through. The light from the crack grew brighter, and we could see the faint outline of the outside world. With a final burst of effort, we managed to force our way through the shaft and into the open air. The sunlight was blinding, but we didn't care. We had made it out of the overpass, and we were finally free. We stumbled away from the overpass, our clothes covered in dust and our bodies trembling with exhaustion. The hidden overpass loomed behind us, its dark secrets now a distant memory. As we drove away from the overpass, Emily and I looked back one last time. The eerie silence had been replaced by the normal sounds of the countryside, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. We had survived the desperate search for an exit, but the experience had left us deeply shaken. The hidden overpass had revealed a dark and disturbing side of the world, and we were left with more questions than answers. The encounter with the overpass had been a terrifying reminder of the dangers that lurk in hidden places, and we knew that we would never forget the experience. As we made our way back to the RV, Emily and I were still reeling from the terrifying encounter inside the hidden overpass. The sunlight felt harsh on our faces, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness we had just escaped. Despite our relief at being free, a gnawing sense of dread lingered in our minds. What had we just experienced, and what were the true intentions of the people we had seen? Our journey back to the RV was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts. We arrived at the vehicle and quickly checked to make sure everything was in order. The RV was untouched, as if it had been waiting for us the entire time. I could see Emily's hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys to unlock the door. "We need to get out of here," Emily said, her voice trembling. "We need to leave before anything else happens." I nodded in agreement. My hands were still clammy, and my heart was pounding in my chest. We got inside the RV and started the engine, eager to put as much distance between ourselves and the overpass as possible. As we drove away, the unsettling silence of the overpass seemed to cling to us. Every rustle of leaves, every passing shadow, felt amplified by the memory of our encounter. The road ahead was familiar, but it now felt menacing and uncertain. We were no longer sure what was real and what was not. "Do you think those people were trying to keep us out?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied. "But it's clear that they didn't want us to find out what was really down there." We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic hum of the RV's engine the only sound breaking the stillness. The landscape outside the window changed from open countryside to dense forest, and the sky grew darker as evening approached. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following us, but there was nothing. "We need to talk to someone," Emily said suddenly. "Maybe there's someone who can help us understand what we saw." I agreed. We needed answers, and the best place to find them was at a local authority or someone familiar with the area. We decided to head toward the nearest town, hoping to find a police station or a local historian who might have some insight into the hidden overpass and its mysterious inhabitants. As we entered the small town, the familiar sights of civilization were a welcome relief. The bright lights of shops and restaurants contrasted sharply with the darkness of the overpass. We parked the RV and went to the local diner, hoping to find someone who could point us in the right direction. Inside the diner, we approached the counter and struck up a conversation with the waitress. She was friendly and helpful, but when we mentioned the hidden overpass, her demeanor changed. She glanced around nervously before speaking. "I don't know much about it," she said quietly. "But there are rumors. People say that overpass has been there for a long time, and no one really knows what's underneath. Some people believe it's better to stay away from it." "Rumors?" I asked. "What kind of rumors?" She looked around again, lowering her voice. "People say that the overpass was built during a time when strange things happened. There are stories about secret organizations and hidden experiments. Some people even think it's cursed." Emily and I exchanged glances. The waitress's words echoed our own fears and suspicions. It seemed that our experience was not entirely unique, and there were deeper mysteries associated with the overpass. "Where can we find more information?" Emily asked. The waitress hesitated before providing the name of a local historian who might be able to help us. We thanked her and left the diner, feeling a mixture of apprehension and hope. We found the historian's office and were greeted by an elderly man who seemed intrigued by our story. As we recounted our experience, his expression grew more serious. "I've heard stories about that overpass," he said slowly. "It's part of a larger legend that goes back many years. The hidden overpass was supposedly used for experiments or secret projects, and there are rumors of strange symbols and rituals associated with it." "What kind of experiments?" I asked. The historian shook his head. "There are many theories, but no one knows for sure. Some believe it was used for psychological experiments, others think it was a site for more sinister activities. The symbols you saw might be related to old rituals or codes used by whoever built it." Emily and I listened intently, absorbing the information. It seemed that the overpass was not just a random location but a part of something much larger and more ominous. As we left the historian's office, the sun had set, and the town was bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. We were no closer to understanding the full extent of what we had encountered, but we now had some context for the strange events. We decided to spend the night in the town, hoping that a good night's sleep would help us process everything. As we lay in the RV, the events of the day replayed in our minds. The hidden overpass, the cryptic symbols, the eerie silence, all of it was a puzzle that we were only beginning to understand. As sleep finally overtook me, I knew one thing for certain: the overpass had changed us. It had exposed us to a world of secrets and shadows, and though we had escaped its immediate dangers, the mystery surrounding it would continue to haunt us. We were left with more questions than answers, and the unknown loomed large over our thoughts. Our journey was far from over. The next morning, the town seemed unnaturally quiet. The sky was overcast, casting a gloomy pall over everything. Emily and I had spent a restless night, plagued by uneasy dreams and troubling thoughts about the hidden overpass. We decided to take one more look at the area before heading back home, hoping that a fresh perspective might shed some light on what we had experienced. We started by revisiting the historian's office to gather more information. The historian had mentioned some local archives that might hold additional clues, so we planned to check them out. The small library was located at the edge of town, a quaint building with ivy-clad walls and a rustic charm. Inside, we were greeted by a librarian who seemed intrigued by our quest. She led us to a dusty corner of the library where old newspapers and records were kept. As we sifted through the yellowed pages and faded documents, we came across a series of articles about the hidden overpass. One article caught our attention. It was dated back to the 1950s and detailed an unexplained accident that had occurred in the area. The report spoke of a mysterious explosion near the overpass, followed by several disappearances and sightings of strange individuals. The article was filled with vague references to government experiments and secret projects, but it didn't provide concrete details. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to a photograph accompanying the article. The image showed the overpass from a distance, with several men in suits and hard hats examining the area. What was striking was a set of symbols etched into the concrete supports of the overpass. They were eerily similar to the ones we had seen. We studied the photograph closely. The symbols seemed to form a pattern, a cryptic language or code that had been used for something specific. The more we looked, the more we were convinced that there was a deeper significance to these markings. "This confirms that there's something more to this place than we initially thought," I said. "But what are they trying to keep hidden?" Emily agreed. "And why are those symbols so important? What do they mean?" We continued our search through the archives, finding more articles and documents that hinted at secret experiments and unexplained phenomena associated with the overpass. Each piece of information added to the growing sense of unease that had settled over us. As we were about to leave the librarian approached us with an old, leather-bound journal she had found tucked away in a corner. "I found this while cleaning," she said. "It looks like it might be related to the overpass. It's from someone named Dr. Mitchell, who was supposedly involved in the experiments." We thanked her and took the journal to a nearby cafe to examine it. The journal was filled with detailed notes and sketches about the overpass, including diagrams of the symbols and descriptions of various experiments. Dr. Mitchell's writing was frantic, filled with references to unpredictable outcomes and incomprehensible phenomena. One entry stood out: "The overpass must remain hidden. The experiments conducted here are beyond human understanding. The symbols are a part of the containment system, designed to prevent any external influence from disrupting the process. It is imperative that the overpass remains undiscovered." As we read the journal, it became clear that the hidden overpass was not merely a construction anomaly but a site of significant and disturbing activity. The experiments conducted there were shrouded in secrecy, and the symbols were part of a complex system intended to keep something contained. "Containment of what?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "What are they hiding?" I didn't have an answer, but the journal's final entry provided a chilling clue: if the overpass is found, the consequences will be dire. There are forces at play that are beyond our control. We must ensure that no one else discovers the truth. The gravity of the situation sank in. Whatever was hidden beneath the overpass was dangerous, and the people involved had gone to great lengths to ensure that it remained a secret. We decided it was time to leave the town and put as much distance between ourselves and the overpass as possible. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. We had uncovered a disturbing truth, and the implications were far-reaching. As we drove away, the overcast sky seemed to press down on us, reflecting our somber mood. The road ahead was uncertain, but we knew that we had stumbled upon something far larger than ourselves. The overpass was no longer just an enigmatic structure, it was a symbol of hidden dangers and dark secrets. Our journey had revealed a haunting revelation, one that would linger in our minds long after we left the area. We were left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: the hidden overpass was a place of profound mystery and danger, and we had narrowly escaped its grasp. As we sped away from the town, a gnawing anxiety settled in. The overpass had cast a shadow over us, a reminder of the secrets it held and the danger that lurked within. The urgency of our escape was palpable. We needed to get as far away from the overpass as possible, but the road seemed endless, and the weight of our discovery made it difficult to focus. The sun had set, and the once familiar landscape now looked alien in the darkness. Emily and I were both on edge, glancing nervously at every turn and shadow. We decided to make one last stop at a small gas station we spotted on the side of the highway. It was a quiet, isolated place, its neon sign flickering intermittently, adding to the sense of foreboding. As we filled up the tank, the attendant, a grizzled man with a wary eye, watched us with a hint of suspicion. His gaze followed us as we made our way to the small convenience store inside the station. The store was sparsely stocked, with only the essentials on the shelves. Emily was anxious and kept checking her phone, hoping for a signal. "Still no service," she said, her frustration evident. "I can't believe we're completely cut off." I agreed. "We need to stay alert. There's something off about this place." As we paid for the gas and a few snacks, the attendant spoke up. "You folks aren't from around here, are you?" "We're just passing through," I replied, trying to sound casual. The attendant's eyes narrowed. "Be careful out there. This road has a way of changing people. Folks come in, but they don't always leave the same way." His cryptic warning sent a chill down my spine. "Thanks for the tip," I said, trying to brush it off. We quickly returned to the RV and continued our journey, eager to leave the eerie gas station behind. We drove for hours, the road stretching out before us like a never-ending ribbon. The headlights cut through the darkness, but the shadows seemed to loom larger with every passing mile. Emily and I were both exhausted, and the tension between us was palpable. Just as we were beginning to relax, hoping that the worst was behind us, I noticed something alarming in the distance, a flickering light, similar to the one we had seen at the hidden overpass. My heart raced as I realized that we were approaching another structure. "What's that up ahead?" Emily asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "I'm not sure," I replied. "But we should check it out, just to be safe." As we drew closer, the flickering light grew brighter, revealing an old, dilapidated building on the side of the road. The sign outside read, "Maintenance Facility," in faded letters. The building was surrounded by a chain-link fence, and a gate was partially open. "We should stay away from that place," Emily said, her voice trembling. "It looks abandoned." I nodded in agreement, but curiosity and a sense of foreboding compelled me to investigate. We parked the RV a safe distance away and approached the facility on foot. The gate creaked as we pushed it open, and the surrounding darkness seemed to close in around us. Inside, the facility was a maze of rusting machinery and neglected equipment. The flickering light came from a single bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling. The air was heavy with the smell of decay, and the silence was almost oppressive. We carefully explored the facility, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. As we ventured deeper, we found a series of old office rooms filled with dusty files and outdated technology. One room, in particular, caught our attention. It had a large map of the area pinned to the wall, with various locations marked in red. Among the marked locations was the hidden overpass, circled in red with a note scrawled beneath it, "Restricted Area. Do not enter." A sudden noise behind us made us jump. I turned around to see a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. The figure was tall and cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hat and scarf. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty building. The figure didn't respond but took a step forward, causing us to retreat instinctively. The atmosphere grew tense, and I could feel my pulse quickening. The figure moved closer, and we could see the glint of something metallic in its hand. "We need to leave," Emily whispered urgently. I agreed. We turned to make our escape, but the figure blocked the exit, its presence looming ominously. It took another step forward, revealing a face that was partially obscured by shadows. The eyes were cold and unreadable, adding to the sense of dread. "Leave us alone," I shouted, but the figure remained silent. In a desperate move, I grabbed a metal pipe from a nearby workbench and held it defensively. Emily and I backed away, our fear escalating with each step. The figure remained still, but its intentions were clear: we were not welcome here. With a final burst of adrenaline, we darted past the figure and made a frantic run for the RV. Our breath came in ragged gasps as we fumbled to get the vehicle started. The figure's footsteps echoed behind us, growing fainter as we pulled away from the facility. Once we were safely back on the road, the sense of relief was palpable. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, where we finally found a hotel with a room available. We spent the night in uneasy sleep, the events of the day replaying in our minds. The final attempt to escape had been a harrowing experience, but it confirmed our suspicions. There was something deeply unsettling about the hidden overpass and its surrounding area. The mysterious figure and the abandoned facility were just the latest in a series of disturbing encounters. As we prepared to leave the next morning, we knew that the hidden overpass was a place of great danger and secrecy. Our encounter with it had been a narrow escape from a threat we could barely comprehend. The road ahead was uncertain, but we were determined to put as much distance between ourselves and the overpass as possible. The haunting revelation had left an indelible mark on us, and the memory of the hidden overpass would remain a dark and unsettling chapter in our lives. The sun was barely up as we packed our belongings into the RV, our sleep having been restless and fraught with anxiety. Emily and I were still reeling from the events of the previous night. The eerie maintenance facility, the shadowy figure, and the flickering light had all combined to create a nightmare that seemed too surreal to be true. We drove in silence for a while, the weight of our experience hanging heavily between us. The road stretched out endlessly, and we tried to focus on the familiar comfort of the RV, hoping it would shield us from any further disturbances. The map at the facility, Emily finally broke the silence. It had other locations marked too. What if there are more of these places? I sighed, trying to push away the unsettling thought. Let's not worry about that right now. We need to get as far away as possible. Our route took us through winding country roads and dense forests. We were now in a remote area of the state, far from the urban centers we were used to. As the morning wore on, the dense trees seemed to close in on us, and the road became more isolated. The sense of being cut off from civilization was growing more intense. After several hours of driving, we decided to stop at a small diner we spotted on the side of the road. The sign outside read Pinewood Cafe, and it looked like a quaint, old-fashioned place. As we stepped inside, we were greeted by the warm smell of coffee and home-cooked food. The cafe was filled with locals, their conversations a low murmur in the background. We took a seat at a booth near the window and ordered breakfast. The waitress, a kind older woman named Ruth, brought us our coffee and started a friendly conversation. Passing through? Ruth asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. Yes, just taking a road trip, I said, forcing a smile. Ruth seemed to sense our unease. You folks look like you've had a rough time. Anything interesting on your travels? Emily and I exchanged glances. The events of the previous night were too fresh and disturbing to recount in detail. Instead, I replied, we had a few surprises, but nothing we can't handle. Ruth's expression turned serious. Be careful around here. This part of the state has its share of secrets. Not all of them are friendly. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Thanks for the warning, I said, trying to keep my tone light. As we ate, Ruth mentioned that the area was known for its old mines and abandoned structures. Most folks around here stay away from the old sites, she said. Too many strange things happen. We finished our meal and thanked Ruth for her hospitality. As we left the cafe, Emily and I discussed the possibility of finding more information about the area's hidden places. Our experience with the overpass had left us wary, and we wanted to understand more about what we might be dealing with. Back on the road, we decided to make a detour to visit a local historical society in a nearby town. We hoped to find some answers about the strange symbols and the hidden overpass. The town, called Brooksville, was small but charming, with a few historical buildings and a quaint main street. The historical society was housed in an old brick building with a faded sign that read, Brooksville Historical Society. Inside, the air was cool and filled with the scent of old paper and books. The curator, a middle-aged woman named Linda, greeted us warmly and offered to help us with our research. We explained our situation and showed her the photographs we had taken of the symbols and the overpass. Linda's eyes widened as she examined them. "These symbols," she said, "I've seen similar ones before. They're related to some old local legends about hidden places and strange occurrences." She led us to a dusty archive room filled with old newspapers and local history books. After several hours of research, we uncovered some disturbing information. The hidden overpass was indeed connected to a series of old legends about secret societies and mysterious disappearances. The symbols we had seen were linked to rituals and warnings meant to keep people away from certain places. Linda explained that the area was once home to a secretive group known for its esoteric practices. The overpass and other hidden structures were believed to be part of their network, designed to protect or conceal something important. Many people who stumbled upon these places, Linda said, disappeared or were found in distressing conditions. It's as if they were drawn into something they couldn't escape. Our minds were racing as we absorbed the information. The overpass was not just a random structure but part of a larger, ominous network. The figure we had encountered and the strange occurrences at the maintenance facility made more sense now, though it didn't make them any less frightening. With this new knowledge, we decided it was best to leave the area immediately. We thanked Linda for her assistance and left the Historical Society with a renewed sense of urgency. We needed to put as much distance between ourselves and the hidden overpass as possible. The drive back to the highway felt endless, but we were determined to get out of the region. As night fell, we found a hotel in a larger town and checked in, grateful for a safe place to rest. The experience had left us shaken, but we had survived the encounter with the hidden overpass. We had faced an unknown danger and learned valuable lessons about the secrets that can lie hidden in plain sight. As we prepared to continue our journey, we knew we had to remain vigilant. The overpass had been a harrowing reminder of the mysteries that can lurk in the world, and we were determined not to let curiosity lead us into danger again. The sun was low on the horizon as Emily and I drove away from Brooksville, the weight of our recent discoveries heavy in the air. The small town and its secrets had left us unnerved, and every passing mile felt like a step further from the unknown dangers we had encountered. Yet, the shadow of fear lingered, a dark reminder of the mysteries that had unfolded. The road ahead was clear, but the sky was overcast, casting an eerie gray light over the landscape. We were on our way to the next destination, determined to keep our focus on the road and away from any hidden overpasses or strange symbols. However, the thought of what we had learned kept gnawing at us. The drive was uneventful until we approached a remote stretch of highway, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills. It was then that Emily noticed something odd on the side of the road. A small, weathered sign was barely visible through the overgrown vegetation. The sign read, "Shadow Falls, 5 miles. Have you heard of Shadow Falls?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "No, but it sounds like another place off the beaten path," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. Emily's curiosity got the better of her. "Maybe we should check it out. It might be interesting, and we could use a break from the road." Reluctantly, I agreed. We took the exit and followed the narrow, winding road that led us deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew cooler, and the sense of isolation intensified with every turn. After a few miles, we reached a small clearing with an old stone archway that read, "Welcome to Shadow Falls." The archway was partially obscured by vines and moss, adding to the sense of decay and abandonment. We parked the RV and stepped out, feeling the chill in the air. The town of Shadow Falls was unlike any we had seen. It was a ghost town, its streets lined with crumbling buildings and overgrown with weeds. The houses, once quaint and charming, were now falling apart, their windows shattered and doors hanging off their hinges. The whole place had an unsettling atmosphere, as if it had been frozen in time. We walked cautiously through the deserted streets, our footsteps echoing off the empty buildings. It was eerily silent, with not even the sound of birds or wind breaking the stillness. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on us and amplifying our sense of unease. Do you get the feeling that we're being watched? Emily whispered. I nodded. Yeah, it feels like something is off here. Let's stick together and keep our eyes open. As we explored the town, we noticed strange symbols etched into the walls of some of the buildings. They were similar to the ones we had seen at the hidden overpass, but more faded and worn. It was clear that this place had a connection to the secrets we had uncovered. In the center of town stood a large, decrepit building that looked like it might have once been a community center or town hall. The doors were ajar, and we hesitated before entering. The interior was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and dust covering every surface. We made our way through the building, each step making the floor creak under our weight. In one of the rooms, we found old photographs and documents scattered across a large table. The photographs depicted scenes of people from the town, their faces frozen in expressions of fear and distress. Emily picked up a dusty book and opened it. The pages were filled with writings and symbols that matched the ones we had seen earlier. As she flipped through the pages, we came across a disturbing entry about a ritual performed by the town's residents. This looks like some sort of journal or diary, Emily said, her voice trembling. It talks about a ritual that was supposed to protect the town from something they called the shadow. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The shadow? What does it say about it? Emily read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. It says that the shadow is a dark presence that preys on fear and can manipulate people's minds. The town's residents performed the ritual to keep it at bay, but it seems like they believed it was only a temporary measure. The gravity of the situation hit us hard. Shadow Falls was not just a ghost town but a place that had been subjected to a dark and malevolent force. The symbols and the ritual were evidence of the town's desperate attempt to ward off an evil presence. We need to get out of here, I said, my heart racing. This place is giving me the creeps. As we left the building, the oppressive silence seemed to grow even heavier. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the deserted streets. We hurried back to the RV, our anxiety mounting with each step. Just as we were about to drive away, we heard a faint noise behind us. It was a low, guttural sound, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. We turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the clearing, its form indistinct and shifting. Emily grabbed my arm, her face pale with fear. What is that? I could barely make out the figure through the gathering darkness. It seemed to be moving toward us, its shape constantly changing. We didn't wait to find out what it was. I jumped into the RV, started the engine, and sped away from Shadow Falls, the eerie figure fading into the darkness behind us. As we drove through the night, the memory of Shadow Falls and its dark secrets haunted us. We had narrowly escaped the influence of the shadow, but the encounter left us deeply shaken. We vowed never to return to that place or seek out any more hidden towns with disturbing histories. The road ahead was clear, but the shadow of fear would always linger, a reminder of the dangers that can lie hidden beneath the surface of even the most seemingly ordinary places.